sometimes the enemy can slip in there with things will never change. This is impossible. And we have to guard against that feeling of like, and it's a lie really, that there's nothing we can do right now, that I just can't. I mean, that is part of how the enemy will wear away at us. And here's the thing. You can't on your own power do a lot of anything. But I realized kind of in my mid 30s, like God really brought me to a breaking point that I was so dependent on myself, and I didn't really trust that God was going to come through with a lot of things. So I was taking the weight of the world on my shoulders, and we're not meant to live like that.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Catholic Link Show. We're your hosts, Drew and Katie Taylor, and we pray this time will be your link to living the faith like never before. And today we have Heather Khym on the show from the Abiding Together podcast. Her and her husband live in Canada right now, Jake Khym, who is one of the co-hosts of Restore the Glory. And I'm just excited to just sit down and just pick your brain, Heather. Especially, as we were talking before about, we minister to a lot of just young families who are in the trenches of working long jobs, toddlers that are up all night, like I just taking grenades left and right. And so it really to hear about what you've got going on, but also just, some wisdom that you can pass mostly to us, but also to our listeners. So
Yeah.
Heather, just welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be with you guys. Looking forward to our conversation today.
It is a great honor to have you. Having listened to much Abiding Together and just the path, and I think the invitation that was into healing of wounds, and just so much there as we dive into this conversation. But I think for our listeners who maybe haven't heard a lot of your content, which is all amazing, if you could give a little bit of your story and your background with the Lord.
Yeah, sure. Well, I live in Canada, and my parents are Scottish, so that just makes for interesting things. And my husband is from Tennessee, so when we got married, actually, it was like cowboys and kilts. It was quite a thing, bringing two totally different worlds together, as marriage usually is. But yeah, so I grew up in a Catholic home, and I think like most kids growing up in a Catholic home, I just thought it was kind of boring. I didn't really understand it. When I went to church, I didn't see a lot of people super engaged. And so I wasn't super engaged. And I remember my mom had a very profound experience with Christ and the Holy Spirit. And it just made her faith become so personal. And so she kept kind of on me like, do you want to go to this retreat? I heard there's a youth retreat. And I was like, no. And I was extremely shy, but also very judgmental. So it was a bit of a combo. And I remember she just kept hounding me about this one retreat that was down in Washington State, which isn't too far from where we live. And I remember kind of like the last minute, I decided, sure, I'll go. And the next morning, grabbed a bag and hopped in a van with a bunch of people I didn't know. And about 2 hours later, I came to my senses and was like, what have I just done? Why am I in this van full of people that I don't know? And I was regretting my decision. But when I went there to this conference, there was probably about 500 young people there. And what I saw was people engaging in prayer and in community and in worship in a way that I had never seen young people engage before. So I'd seen that with my mom and her little prayer group, but I was like, that's for old people. And so this was really new for me. And I was like, this is real for them. There's something real happening. Like they have a relationship with a real person. And I didn't have a context for that on a personal level. So I kind of observed a lot with my arms folded, mind you, but I observed. And then the next year I went back and my heart was open that time. And what no one knew is that I had a lot of trauma in my life. I was hurting. I felt very isolated because no one knew what I was going through, as I think many of us experience as kids. There's a lot of things that we carry as a little child, difficult things that are happening to us that we keep secrets with. And so, that's how I went, was just this broken, shy kid to this retreat, but kind of open and wondering, like, is there a relationship for me here, like with God? And or is it just for everybody else? And so on the Saturday night of the retreat, the guy who was speaking just came right off the stage up to me, and I was in the middle of the crowd. I was no one to be noticed. Really, I had really bad hair. I was super awkward. Like I was no one to be picked out of a crowd. And he just came up to me in the middle of the row, and he said, the whole time I was talking, I just had this sense that God has great things in store for you. And can I pray with you? And I just was able to squeak out a little tiny, okay, because I was just so shocked he was even talking to me. And I just closed my eyes and I opened my heart, and he prayed, and I had such a profound personal encounter with God. I couldn't even move out of my chair for a couple of hours. I was just overwhelmed with the love and the presence of God. And that radically changed my life. I mean, there was a few years in there with high school where I was still trying to figure it out. I'm kind of smoking pot with my friends and partying because that's all I knew and that's all I had, as far as like I had no community, no Christians around me. But then having these experiences in the summer where I would go back to this retreat, and it took me a couple of years to kind of get those things in line with each other. I think that experience was just like the Lord saw me in the midst of where I thought I was just alone and I had all these secrets and no one knew. He was revealing to me he knew, and he saw me. And those kind of encounters, they're not just for someone like me. Some people listening sort of like, well, that's good for you. But I think that's the most beautiful thing about God, is that he wants each of us to experience him in a very personal and profound way.
Yeah, man, it's cool to hear, because there's actually a lot of parallels with my story. My first real encounter with Christ was at a Steubenville High School conference with about 1,200 other people, and before it had just been kind of this thing, and then just having, just a profound encounter with Christ and realizing that this is a thing, this is real. And then having to grapple with that a little bit of like, now what do I do with this thing now that I've experienced this, which I think is so beautiful. Okay, so fast forward. So so I want to hear about your college experience, and then how did you meet Jake, and then ultimately, like, what was it like in those first couple of years of marriage? Because I think a lot of people, when we see Catholic speakers or podcasters, and we look and we're just like, you hear them talk and you're like, man, they're so amazing. Like, I bet their kids at 2 years old, like, they couldn't walk, but they were just floating up the stairs because they were so holy. And then, like,
that's
you
all
look
true.
at,
No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
but it's easy to compare your bloopers to everyone else's highlight reel, right? When you look around and you're just like, well, I'm just trying to get my 1-year-old not to flip over the pew and scandalize the old woman behind us, which happened last week.
Yeah.
So
True story.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Talk about that.
Yeah. So after high school, that retreat that I went to was put on by a ministry in Washington State, which I ended up being joining after high school. So it was similar to Net Ministries, where you do evangelization, you travel around in community in a big van, and you live in very close proximity to people, and you learn how to love people. So it was actually wonderful on so many levels. But my heart was just burning to share about Jesus with people. And in that process, I realized, I want to do this with my life. Like, I just felt this calling, and the place that was on my radar to learn how to do that was Franciscan University. I knew that they had solid leadership. Father Michael Scanlon was, very spirit filled, loved Jesus, really, committed to the church. And I was like, that's where they train Catholic leaders. So I'm just going to go there. So that's where I went. And I started studying theology and catechetics. And shortly after I got there, I met Jake. So we just had some mutual friends, and we met each other, and he was dating another girl. And so none of that, really mattered. It was just like I was meeting this person, and somewhere in there, I was like, I wonder if he's the one. And I was like, wait, I don't think like that. Like, I just wasn't the type of person to think like that. So I was like, weird. That's weird, so just put a little bookmark in that. But we just started hanging out and experiencing in community, like praying as a community and seeking God together, and we'd stay up really late just talking about things like that. So our friendship was just that. It wasn't for any other reason, because he was dating someone else, and we were really good boundaries and all of that stuff. But we were growing both in our knowledge of who God is through the theology classes we were taking, but our hearts were growing too. And then, shortly after that, he decided he broke up with this girl, and then he wanted to discern the priesthood. And I was like, oh, good Lord, like, this is just such a thing, why does this have to be like this? So anyway, one thing leads to another, and we start dating, and we got engaged within 7 months because we had already been hanging out quite a bit and had built this friendship. And then 8 months after that, we got married. So in the year 2000, we got married. So we've been married for 23 years, and we have 3 kids. And yeah, so that's kind of where we were. We had this beautiful like relationship with God. Jake really was coming from more of he had learned a lot of intellectual knowledge. He loved theology, and he was he was having a experience of that moving from the head to the heart for him while he was at Franciscan. And at that time, as we're preparing for marriage, we're realizing that we have wounds and we have issues. And I remember saying to him, we just really need to work on these before we get married so that we don't carry this into our family. And so we both had committed to that, and we're kind of working on things, whatever that meant, just like what we knew at the time, which wasn't a lot. And then we got married. So yeah, a couple years in, like we couldn't get pregnant right away, and that comes with its own things. But a couple of years in, we finally, got pregnant, had our first child, and we were living in Denver. So we had left Steubenville, and we're working at a parish there, a really significant parish there in the Denver area. And I remember one day we had just had our first daughter. She's maybe 3 months old, and Jake and I are having a conversation, and he said to me, yeah, I was really helping this guy because he's struggling with pornography. And I told him, you should go talk to this priest because he's really good at like helping people through that. And I just thought, and so I just stepped out and I asked this question. I said, how would you know that? And everything got very quiet. And I was like, oh no. And so, yeah, Jake says, I mean, he had a choice in that moment, like either to keep this thing hidden or to finally be honest. And thank God he was courageous enough to be honest. And what he told me was that he had been struggling with a very significant addiction to pornography for quite some time. Even though he had assured me that that was over before we got married and that wasn't coming into our marriage, I think he wanted to believe that. And I think he also thought that marriage would sort of just take all of that away, that would be no, now it'll all go away because I have this person and I love this person and we can have a sexual relationship and all those things that you can convince yourself of, because he really wanted to be free, but couldn't get there on his own. And so I described that day of that was the worst day. And it was also the best day, because it finally got honest and everything came out, over the course of the next few days, kind of everything came out. And it was, honestly, it was terrible. Like it was devastating. I understood that to be a break in our vows, even though it wasn't like with a physical person, there's still all that goes along with that. And I felt very obviously deceived and lied to and didn't know what to make of that. Like, what else don't I know? Like, who is this person? Like, there was just like a whole bunch of things that came up. And thankfully, we had some support within the community. It's awkward because we're both working for a church. It's like, who do you go to? Like, who can you trust? And at the same time, this is the real stuff that I think a lot of people are dealing with. Maybe it's not this particular thing, but we all have things under the surface that we're struggling with, to a variety of, severe to not so severe, but, and whether it be sin or just wounds that we're dealing with and struggling with that are massively affecting our life. And we often don't know where is a safe place for me to begin to process this, or who can come alongside of me to help me. And often we just try so hard to either manage it on our own, or we cope and we just numb ourselves to it and try to shove it away. And I think we all know that that isn't really a thing. It's going to be coming out, and it's going to be affecting us whether we realize it or not. So that began our process of, I think, for me, it was, well, either God is who he says he is, or he's not. Either he can bring healing here and restore this, or not. And I guess we're going to find out. Like, that's where the rubber met the road of my faith, I think, in a very clear way. And so we began this process of, counseling and all accountability, and how does my heart heal and become open again when there's been so much hurt and a break of trust? And is he even trustworthy? And a lot of those answers were, no, he's not yet. And so there was a lot of building that had to happen, and it was a very long process. But, the Lord brought profound healing. I mean, he worked a miracle. Like Jake has not struggled with pornography since that day that he told me that. And I know some people are listening right now and they're going, no way. Like, how would you know? And I know what you're thinking, because it sounds like it's impossible, especially in the world that we live in today. But God really is who he says he is. And he really can do miracles. And Jake wanted a miracle, and he was desperate, and he came to God in his desperation, and he was willing to do some hard work, and he was willing to make some difficult choices, and he was willing to be very exposed to people um, that were equipped to accompany him. Right. So he had a lot of humility in the process and was willing to keep himself in a place of dependence on God and the community, and to grow and to heal. And so that's exactly what happened. It wasn't quick, but that is what happened. And so yeah, so I say that just, I mean, honestly, some people are probably like, oh shoot, like why is she bringing this up? And I get it. And what I want you to hear in that is God really wants to set us free. It's not just a story. It's not just something that we like read or like believe in to try to make ourselves feel better, which a lot of atheists will say. He's a real person, and he has power to change things that we can't. That's why he's God. And that's why we can look to him as a savior, because we actually need saving. There's a lot of places that we need saving and can't do it for ourselves. So
There's so much there, Heather. The reality of that miracle, Jake bringing it to the light within the sacrament of his marriage. And I think of 1 John, and like light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it, and that process. But the reality, since I've heard a little bit of his story, that there were years of confession and prayer
mm-hmm.
and struggle and going to confession twice in one day, and like all
Mm-hmm.
of the hard
Mm-hmm.
process of that. And I think I was very disheartened because I spent college trying to heal. I came in with a lot of trauma, a lot of sexual trauma. My parents were divorcing when I was in college. There was a lot of like family trauma. And Drew and I waited to date as I like went through counseling and walked through like PTSD and anxiety and just a
Mm-hmm.
lot of healing. And as I then entered into marriage and thought that the sacrament would like fix it all, and then the shame of realizing, because there were definitely years of struggle there of trying to move from my head to my heart and the way that I was living.
Mm-hmm.
But then going into marriage hoping that all of this work that I had done would facilitate an ease. And yes, there is beauty when we bring those things to the light. And there was a gift that was given to Jake there. But I also know that there was such a years of struggle
Mm-hmm.
through that process, through that healing that occurred. I don't know if you want to dive into
Yeah,
that.
well, I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit
Yeah.
more, because I
Mm-hmm.
really relate to. I mean, by the time that we dated, like similar to you, like we had a friendship before we actually dated other people for a while, and then when um, we finally got together, and we were just like this is either going to end with us getting married, or we're not going to be friends anymore. There's only if we get serious about this, there's only two ways this ends.
Yeah.
So we took a lot of time to discern, and I would like to think that by that time I was serious enough about my faith that we were, I was as intentional as I possibly could be about this relationship, because I did not want to screw it up. And so we did, as much healing as we could, and as much prep as we could, and for this marriage. And I think there's two parts that are tough, right? Because when someone, they're married, and you hear like, oh, like you have no idea what's coming, and you're like, that's really disheartening. But there kind of is a little bit of truth to that, because your vocation, I mean, there is nothing that shows you your inadequacies and your selfishness and your pride like being married to someone, or having little toddlers, running around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know. Can you speak to maybe either someone who is, preparing for marriage, or, they've come into marriage and, felt like they did, they went through pre-Cana, they did everything that they could to prepare for this, but then all of a sudden now the, the, um, the lies or maybe the facade a little bit is starting to get stripped away, and you're starting to
See the wins.
see the wounds of each other and of yourself. So
Mhm.
yeah, what would you say to someone who's in that stage?
Hmm. I would just say, let Jesus begin to love you there. Truly. I mean, that's not just like a trite thing to say. And then people go, well, how do I do that? I think part of it is realizing we do have a lot of things in our life, and most of us aren't totally aware of our own story. We might know certain parts, but we don't know why. So Jake was aware that he had this addiction, but he didn't know why. That's a symptom of something else, like another wound that's under the surface. And usually those things aren't things that we chose. They're things that either happened to us, or they're gaps in our heart where something good should have happened or been provided for us and wasn't. And so we begin to go to other things, or we've seen something that we shouldn't have seen, or we get drawn into something. And so we all have wounds, all of us. That is unfortunately the result of the fall, and but that's not God's intention. It never was his intention from the beginning, and his intention for us is that we experience healing, wholeness, and deeper union with him and with one another. So the enemy always wants to divide and scatter, and God always wants to heal and restore and bring things together. But often we don't know what all of that is. So to just say, well, do your work, before you get married. And I think that's good. Do it to the extent that you can and that you're aware of. But as you grow and as you mature, you couldn't possibly deal with the reality of all the things that are happening in your life. And I think that that's a mercy from God, is that he lets it become revealed as we grow. And there's been so many more things over the years that I've realized about myself and about my story, and that Jake with his story, and all of the layers underneath different things that we struggle with. And so I think part of it is we have to give each other a lot of grace in knowing there will be things that are revealed to even the person who has it going on as you grow. And we all have a story. So I think one of the first things I would say is start to share your story with each other as much as you know. And I think that's actually a very profound work, is to do work around your story. And this is something that Jake and I are developing right now, is an online course on how to come to understand your story, and what are the elements that you look at, and how was God moving in your life over the years, and how is the enemy trying to, and still trying to, assault different things in your life. So just begin to share your story with each other. And I think that's one of the things that Jake and I have done fairly well over the years, is that we've had a lot of compassion for each other in our story, because there are so many things, and it's not just for us, like I said before, that we didn't choose, and they've impacted us. That's everyone. And so what do we do with that? At some point, we have to take some responsibility to say, okay, I'm not going to let this continue in my life. I want to invite the power of God in here, and I'm going to invite other people in to help me. Like I said, we often can't do that ourselves. So I think counseling is good, but not all counseling is good. Some counseling is bad, so it's good. It's really important to find a good counselor that isn't just going to take care of the surface things, like just the symptoms, but is actually going to go under the surface with you, and is equipped to do that with a number of ways. But I think community is also a big part of that, and not just a community that'll go, yeah, man, that's hard, but one that'll actually maybe like come alongside you and pray for you and hold you accountable, and is also sharing with you. I think those elements are really, really important. So doing the work, when I say things like that, what I mean is start reading books, open your heart to counseling, whatever you can get. Like Jake loved John Eldredge. That was like a mentor to him, even though he hadn't met John Eldredge yet. Like through his books, he was becoming to understand a lot about his own heart as a man through what John Eldredge was writing. And I would say, there's different people for me that I was looking to, that were inspiring me and mentoring me even from a distance. So I think you can get that now more than ever through podcasts and videos, and there's so much good stuff out there. But I think it comes down to, at the very bottom of that, will we have faith that God can move mountains in us, and that he really desires good things for us, and that he can set us free. And if we don't know that yet, like, that's okay. If you don't know that, you may not have that experience yet. You may have just heard that, but you don't know that here. To just begin to ask for the gift of faith, because it is a gift. It's not something you can just muster up on your own. It is a gift. And so I pray for that often, for myself, for my children, for Jake, for people that we minister to. I pray for the gift of faith, in who God is. Yeah.
Yeah, the faith there that the Lord can do. And I think often it helps me to think about areas that I thought were hopeless that have changed, or what is something that I am confident in. Like, what is it that I have that confidence? And then how can I look for that feeling, that level in these areas that feel really shaky and unknown, have really helped through spiritual direction of just really confident learning confidence in the Lord, learning
Mm.
faith in the Lord. Even if those things that were really confident have slightly have changed over the last 12 years, that they were a good tool.
Yeah, we're becoming. I mean, I think that's one way to look at it is we're in the process of becoming,
Yes.
and we're not going to arrive there very quickly, with any of the things. That's just not generally how God works. He can come suddenly into something, but that doesn't mean the process is over. And I mean, that's how creation works. There's a lot of like things take time. We're in springtime right now. We're starting to see the buds come up, but this has taken time. There was a time of desolation and a time where everything was hidden under the ground. And so I think accepting that we are becoming, but also having an idea of who do I want to become? Like, what
Mm.
is it that I want? Like, what kind of person do I want to be? And then how do I begin to cultivate some of that? So go ahead, Drew.
Mhm.
You were going to say something as
There's so much.
well.
So good.
Yeah, I would echo Jake in John Eldridge. I read Wild at Heart when I was 19-ish, and that really, really one of the books that changed the yeah, just my whole perspective on life. And when you really read something, it's similar to like reading John Paul II and Theology of the Body and stuff, where you read this and you're like, you are putting words to everything that I experience right now, and I've never been able to quantify it before. And I think that's just such an amazing gift to be able to walk through. What would you say to what would you say to our listeners who are like, I hear you guys, I need healing, but I mean, I'm working 60 hours a week and my kids are running up the wall, and or I'm a stay-at-home mom and I don't have this awesome community to walk with me. Like I walk into church and I'm the youngest person by 40 years. Yeah, like when we talk to people, or even just like you could look at our society in general, there can be a lot of anxiety, despair, when it comes to this type stuff, because we didn't grow up with super awesome Catholic families. We don't know what it looks like. We have no idea. We're like, I love the phrase God is a God of process, and this stuff takes time. But at some point, I'm just reading the theory of like, this is how to raise a family, and like, okay, like here comes the science experiment of our life. Like, hope it works out.
Yeah, yeah, totally,
So,
totally.
yeah. So yeah. So
Mm,
what would you say to someone who knows that they need the healing? They're like, Heather, I hear you, but how am I even supposed to do that with? I just feel like I'm being buried alive right now.
yeah, yeah, and that's real. I remember feeling like that at various times, and you're also very depleted because of lack of sleep, and you're pouring out a lot like to your kids because they constantly need something, and that's just what kids do. They need a lot of help. They're dependent on you for a reason. And so I want to hold that as that's true. And also, sometimes the enemy can slip in there with things will never change. This is impossible. And we have to guard against that feeling of like, and it's a lie, really, that there's nothing we can do right now, that I just can't. I mean, that is part of how the enemy will wear away at us. And here's the thing, you can't on your own power do a lot of anything. I've learned this. I used to be very self-reliant. I'm in recovery right now for being self-reliant, but I was also pretty strong. I come from a good family. I had a lot of resources to pull from, but I realized kind of in my mid 30s, like God really brought me to a breaking point that I was so dependent on myself, and I didn't really trust that God was going to come through with a lot of things. So I was taking the weight of the world on my shoulders, and we're not meant to live like that. We are children of a good, good father who wants to provide for us and wants to give us strength that we don't have on our own. So I think I want to hold that in a beautiful tension that yes, you're depleted. Yes, you're pouring out a lot. Yes, your time is limited, but this isn't impossible. There's always something you can do to open up the door to Jesus. And that could be 5 minutes, of prayer every day, but you're actually coming to him with this place of desperation. Lord, I really need you. Will you come, bring your Holy Spirit and begin to move in my life? That can be simple. I think looking for a retreat to go to once a year where spouses, if you're married, where you can support each other. If you're not married, just find one that works with your schedule to get away for a weekend. It could be a healing retreat. Dr. Bob Schutz has a beautiful healing ministry. My husband Jake does a lot of things with him, and our friend Sister Miriam. And that's just one thing that you could do to begin to understand your story and what is the process of healing. Now, if you're like, that's impossible, I don't have any money, I don't whatever, here's where podcasts and books come in, because those are accessible at any time. I listen to podcasts a lot. I just pop my AirPods in and I'm folding laundry or I'm doing a thing and I'm receiving. And so what's really profound, even with our podcast, Abiding Together, what people say to me most, I was just at an event in Texas this weekend. Several women came up to me and they started to talk and then they just started to cry. And this often happens. And they say, you don't know. And they just pause and they're like, you guys are like friends to me. And I've been in a place of isolation, and it's either because they're parents and they're home and their kids are napping all the time and so they can't connect with other people, or they've lost friends, or people have died around them, or they don't have community, or their spouse has left them. And for whatever reason, they find this place in themselves where they feel this gap. And it's because there's three of us who are deep friends having real conversations, and we're being very honest and vulnerable. And they get to somehow be a part of that. I don't know how that occurs. I'm like, this is miraculous. There are resources and things that you can access at any level that you're at. I think it is wonderful if you can get into your schedule, both the husband and the wife, or if you're a single person, just get it into your schedule to go on a retreat of some kind every year. It can be local. It can be something, like I said, a Dr. Bob retreat. It doesn't have to be healing, but a men's and women's retreat. It could be a John Eldridge retreat, like whatever is where you are at, that will meet you where you're at. And then in the meantime and in between all of those things, like you can access, there's so many great podcasts out there and people who are modeling what does it look like to really live out your Catholic faith, like in the world that we live in today, because it isn't easy. And I think mentorship is something that we all need at whatever stage we're at. And like you said, Drew, like we don't often have access to that in like natural ways, like it used to be within families, or we lived in a multi-generational sort of community where we could access that. But that isn't the reality for most people. I do think that God will provide people for us within the community. So I know Jake and I both have a lot of spiritual mothers and fathers or brothers or whatever that are just filling in gaps where we didn't get that, or the Lord just wants to bless us with more. So I would just begin to pray about that, but also open your heart to it. Like, who is God putting right in front of you that might be someone who can accompany you in some way? And it's okay to ask everything from, can you show me how to bake bread, to, like, here's something in my spiritual life, or as a parent, like, what do you do? And how do I begin to navigate this? Feeling like we're in isolation is the work of the enemy. That is just not how we're meant to live. And we can't do it on our own. We really can't.
Yeah, I think that that's one of his greatest tactics, is making us feel that division within relationship here, but
Mhm.
also just in community in general. And that reality that we touched a little bit on the self-reliance. I think our culture just promotes that there is this invitation to, well, you don't need a mentor and you don't have a mentor, just Google it and you'll be fine. And this need of relationship, of human learning, and that we can get that through books and podcasts, that especially through a book that lays it out and walks us through that
Mhm.
process, which is a deeper than like just the quick Google question. I
Mhm.
and I One of the things that you touched on earlier that I wanted to go back to was vows and absolutes.
Mhm.
Oh, there's so much there that I came in speaking in absolutes, period.
Mm.
Everything was, and I will always, I will never, you will always, you will never. Ev
Mhm.
Everything was an absolute, and the healing of the way that I spoke, which was a reflection of the way that I thought, and
Mhm.
therefore the vows that I was making along the way, the strongholds that I was building up, and the invitation to break that down. And Dr. Bob Schutz is phenomenal at that work.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yes, so much. And also on your comments for priorities. I think, yes, we are drowning in life.
Mhm.
There will never be an easy time to step away for a retreat. Um, there will never be an easy time to schedule weekly counseling.
Mhm.
But the fruit that can come from that, or weekly holy hour, or prayer time, but getting these priorities
Mhm.
defined and making the space for them. I think what you were saying there is just so important for us to really
Mhm.
go, this will never change. Am I willing to do the work to let it change? Do you want to be
Mhm.
healed? As Jesus turns and
Mhm.
asks us, as we stand around the pool, like, do you want to be healed? You say this is a problem, but will you take the step with me? Will you pick up your mat and walk?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I think often we allow the excuses. It would have been possible for that man that day to say, "But it's the Sabbath and I can't pick up my mat,"
Mhm.
which is what the crowd around him said. Um,
Mhm.
but the Lord says, "Pick it up and let's do this now, even though this isn't
Yeah.
the right time."
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So thoughts on
It's
that?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really that's really good. There's always something we can do. We might not be able to do everything or the big, you can't look at it like this huge mountain that you have to overcome. It's like, what's the next right step that you can make? On a practical level, something that Jake and I do every year, and you can do this whether you're married or single, whatever state of life you're in, but we usually meet in August before the school year would start, and we'd have a visioning day. So we'd get my parents to babysit our kids when they were younger, and that was just our time to sort of look at the whole calendar, that on a practical level, like what are the non-essential, or what are the non-negotiables, like these things are stuck in the calendar, this is happening that we want to be really intentional about. And so one of those things might be a retreat, or one of them, might be something else that you need to do, a vacation or something like that. But we also talked about, like, what are the things that are going on with each of our kids right now? What are they needing this year? What can we see? What have we been noticing in them? And what are some of the plans that we can make this year that we think will help to feed them in the way that they're really needing, or to like build their confidence or build their self-esteem or get them involved in sports or whatever that might be. So there's a lot of practical things in there, but the process was, one, us being on the same page about what is the priorities for this year, because you can't prioritize everything or else nothing's a priority. You have to make some decisions about, for this year, what are we going to highlight, and then what are the things that we'd like to do but we may not get to, and that's a different kind of list that you make. So I think it can begin with just simple practices like that. We do that every year, and you have to come back and reassess it. How's it going? Like, are we really sticking to the things? Are we really getting what we need? And if not, how can I support you, or how do I need to be supported for those things to occur? I think in the process of healing and discovering, who we are and our story, that can take on a whole life of its own if we let it. And I just want to clarify a couple things, because I think what the world, when they talk about healing and therapy and it's such a big thing right now. Everyone's going to therapy. I think that can become a whole distraction in and of itself that isn't actually about healing. I think it can become a lot about us turning inward and just feasting on our emotions. And that actually will never lead to healing. It often will make it worse. And it often will make relationships worse with the things that we're talking about. If it involves family or spouse or whatever, it can make things a lot worse. So if you are going to see a counselor, it's good to have a therapeutic plan. It's good to know what your goals are, that actually you want to not be going to counseling one day. You want to, experience freedom and healing. And I don't know if some people have that goal. Like, I think that's just like, well, I'm just going to go here. And part of that is because we don't know how to function very well in a community, or we don't know how to be a good friend or have good friends to support us. So we can often look to a counselor to be everything for us. You're like my confessor and my friend and my therapist and my everything. And they're not equipped to do that, for one. But secondly, we need more people involved in the process. So I'm a huge fan of counseling. Jake is a counselor. My spouse, he is a counselor. So I'm not knocking counseling. I'm just saying don't pick just any old counselor. Make sure that it's someone who can guide you into a place of real healing and freedom, and not just in the sense that the world says, like where we, become self-empowered and all of that stuff. It's good to be confident, but for God to actually be the healer, um, because that changes everything. That's what I'm talking about. Miracles are happening. And realistically, there are things that we all have that aren't just, our circumstances aren't going to change immediately. Some of them are just long suffering places. Like Jake and I have places in our marriage right now. We're going to marriage counseling again, first we keep going back over as we get into deeper layers. And it's not because we're mad at each other. It's not the typical stuff, but it's like, these are things from long, long ago that weren't our fault, that are impacting how we love and relate to each other. So we're in it again, and we go a little deeper this time. And I say that as an encouragement to not put pressure on yourself that you got to take care of everything all at once. But as you said, we come in with a lot of beliefs about things, and God has to renew our mind, and He has to. It has to be held up against what is true and good and beautiful. It has to hold up against what's being said in Scripture, and the only way for us to know that is to begin to expose ourselves to the truth. So that has to be the priority too. And just one more thing I'll say before I pass it back to you guys. But one of the things that we also talked about when our kids were young was, what are the messages that we want them to know and hear from us? And we would be very intentional about how we would weave those things into everything that we're doing. So we don't want them to get the message that you have to earn love from me, so you better work hard and then I'll praise you. A lot of parents don't want to do that. But that might be what was modeled for us when we were younger. So we have to be intentional about how are we going to um, deliver messages to them in a variety of ways, through the way that we are affectionate with them, through the time that we spend with them, whether we're prioritizing them or not, and then how we pray with them, how we, raise them, and how we teach them to interact with other people. All of those things, I think, are good to have conversations about and to think about. Yeah.
Man, again, there's so many threads I would love to pull and just unravel. I think one of the biggest things that just kind of comes on my heart as you're talking about priorities is to encourage men to step up to lead their families. And again, I think that can be a colloquialism, or you hear that and you're like, cool. That's like, oh, just go be healed. That's like, yeah, go, yeah. But on a practical level for men, I think when you look at Bible verses like Ephesians 5 that say that wives should submit to their husband, you look at the etymology of submit, right, is submissio, under the mission. But like, so what is your mission as a man? What what is your vision for your family? And if you don't have one, now is a great time to sit down and think about, what do I want for my family? Do I want holiness? Do I want my wife and my children to go to heaven? And if the answer is yes to that, then what are some practical steps that I have to take in order to make that happen? And I think, as you talk about like tactics of the devil, I think the devil can make that sound lofty or impossible or stupid. But when you look at, no, these are our priorities, this is my mission, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to fail at multiple times a day, but I'm going to pick myself back up. I think a lot of our society has just lost, like you were talking about with, the idea of identity or our story. Not only have we lost like our backstory, and our family of origins, and how does that affect us? But I think we've lost our vision story. I think we've lost like the heroic storyline of our life, how that fits into the Bible and the story of salvation. Because when you recapture that now, like, I just think about so many people in my life that are heroes that don't realize that they are. The men in my life that are struggling in their marriage and families, but they're trying to stop generations of sin and alcoholism and anxiety and depression. It's like, that is a heroic thing to do.
Yeah.
So when it comes to priorities, I guess I would just encourage the men, and obviously, the wives as well, to support this, but to look and say, what is the vision for our family, and how are we going to structure our life to be able to accomplish that? If your mission
Mhm.
is to support the Arizona Cardinals at all costs, I'm going to tell you that they're going to fail you because they're not that good of a team. And right, and they're not God. They can't fulfill that part, right? And if we're
Mhm.
serious about what our mission is in our faith, then then what we do, how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we tell what are the stories that we're telling our kids, all of that
Mhm.
matters. I don't know, does that make
Mhm.
sense? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I have 1,000 thoughts. I mean, there's also I feel like, yes, 1,000 places we could go. I will say, I describe myself as, like, very self-reliant and strong and whatever, so the submitting under your husband's authority, that was like, well, that could be misinterpreted 1,000 ways also, and so I think what's most important to understand there is that it also says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and he laid down his life for her." And so when my husband is operating in a selfless way, when it's not about him and about his needs and his desires and getting his way, but he really is thinking of the good of me, he's listening to the needs of our family and he's making decisions that are selfless based on that. What a relief that is to me. I want to lean into his strength, because if I don't have opportunities to lean into his strength and he's keeping everything for himself, then I just won't need him. And then that causes separation and division within the marriage. So I think, this is what the Bible says. It's what JP2 reiterates over and over again, is that we find ourselves when we lose ourselves, when we truly make a gift of ourselves to the other, or if you're not married, like to the world or to your religious vocation, wherever God has you. When you are willing to lose yourself is when you find yourself. And that's where your true happiness, your meaning, but where you also become fully alive. It doesn't make sense with what the world is saying right now. They're like, lose yourself. Like, what about my dreams and my whatever? And I don't want to diminish dreams. Have your dreams. But in all honesty, Jesus is the dream. He is. He is everything that we are longing for. And he is not going to be, the second best, like to anything that the world is offering. Like, I'm experiencing this now in my relationship with him in a way that I never have before. And like I said, I've been trying to walk with God since I was very young. He is everything to me. And what he is offering me, the love that he's offering me, the mercy he's meeting with, the joy of the adventure of living a life with him, with following his path, is like, it's so awesome and exciting and hard, but that's what makes a good story. That is the good adventure, is that, yeah, life is hard, but great things come out of hard things. That's the story of the gospel, is it not? Like, that is the cross and the resurrection. Like, when you're willing to lay it down, that's when the most beautiful things occur, when we submit ourselves to God's plan and to his power.
Oh, and I think with that, in submitting to his plan and power is time in scripture. And I think we've like talked around it, but the importance of like, yes, there are
Mhm.
wonderful podcasts and there are wonderful books, but we must know the truth, and that truth has to be rooted in scripture. It has to be rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's the narrative we also need to speak over our children, and we need to let it speak over us in our identity as a beloved child of God the Father, because identity is such a place of attack,
Mhm.
that the devil comes in and attacks his goodness as a father.
Mhm.
But yes, the importance of continuing to spend time there, even if we've read the whole Bible in a year, that there is more, that it is living and active, that it wants to speak to this moment, to this wound, to this heartache. Oh, I just want to talk forever to you. Oh,
I
mm,
have a different topic that
ooh,
I know.
ooh,
Ooh, a
okay.
curveball right at the
Go.
end. All right. That's
Well,
awesome.
but it relates to this. So we're gonna go for it. Um, so I kind of railed on men here to talking about like, all right, you need to step
Oh,
up and lead your families. But I think one of the things that I am most blessed with in my life is that Katie has done a lot of healing, um, in and specifically in parts of our life where she supports me. And I really do feel like I have the most supportive wife in the world in all of my crazy ideas.
Mm.
And but that one, I don't think that comes naturally at all, especially in our fallen and broken world. and and I take it for granted a lot because that's just the way that our marriage operates. So I guess I'll kind of kick it over to you, Katie. In how can you encourage the women listening to this to be supportive of the men in their life? And then we'll kick it over to Heather to see if she has thoughts on this, because I want to like figure this out.
Yeah. So background, Air Force officer, high achiever, in control of everything. And so bringing that into marriage to come into this desire for submission, I think at the core was a realization that what the world was offering wasn't working. It wasn't working in relationships. It wasn't working in my joy. It wasn't working in my desire for life to continue on this path. And so something had to change. And I think when we honestly look at our marriages, and if we are controlling and fighting our spouse on every decision that's being made, is it working?
Hmm.
Is it honestly working?
Hmm.
And then again, are we willing to try something that's really uncomfortable, which is that release of control?
Hmm.
It's that surrender. It's what are the things that I can control? What are the things I can't control? What should I be handing over? And allowing their husbands, allowing my husband to fall.
Hmm.
And instead of being like, I told you so, and my way would have been better, it's the, okay, we learned. So where do we go next?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If that makes
I don't know,
sense.
Heather. What would be your advice to women
Yeah,
out there?
I think there's a lot of things in there. And you know, I think I'll go back to the becoming thing. Like men in general, I think they have a desire to be strong and to lead well and to be heroic. And that's built into your hearts, like that's just something about the heart of a man. That's why stories like Braveheart or, the Gladiator or whatever, like it does something. It doesn't mean you have to be super masculine in those like a fighting kind of ways, but there is something in the heart of the man that wants to do things that are heroic and want to lay down your life because you're made in the image of Christ. That's who he is, and you're also not there yet in a lot of ways. You might not have the virtue to execute that really well. And so as you're growing, I think that's where wives need to be generous and sensitive to the growing and maturity that's occurring. It's like you might not get it right all the time. Is that okay? Like, is it okay to make mistakes? Also, for the guy, I would say don't assume that you're in the perfect place and that you don't need your wife, and that you don't need her wisdom and her gentleness and her, her insights and all of that, because we're made with specific gifts too, and it's in the complementarity of both of us in our unique giftings that help a family to thrive and to stay unified. So I think we need to bring our individual gifts to the table, both of us, and to be very generous with each other. But also to be honest, when Jake came to me with that confession early on in our marriage, I didn't threaten, I didn't say, I'm out of here, but I did say, this is not the kind of marriage we're going to have. I was putting a stake in the ground to say, I don't deserve this, for one. I deserve to have a husband who will be faithful and who isn't going to have, devastating sin like this wreaking havoc in his life. And there was a part of me that was saying it because I didn't believe that's who Jake was. I could see what even he couldn't see. I think he believed this was just always going to be a part of him, and his shame around all of that was part of his identity. And I was trying to call up the man that I knew that God desired him to be, and he wasn't yet that guy. But he had the potential to be that guy if he began to cooperate with God in a different kind of way, beyond just going to confession, because he was doing that, beyond just like trying all the things he could do, but bringing other people into it. So I think we have to believe in who the person God desires the person to become. as well, and to begin to call that out in each other. So, when Katie, you see that Drew isn't being the man of God that that he is meant to be able to gently say that instead of reacting out of just anger or taking it personally. There is an art to being able to correct one another in love, and to come beside each other and say, hey, I'm not sure what your intention was there, but this really hurt me, or this affected the kids, or this just didn't land very well. Like, can we try again? Can we try again? There's a lot of that in our marriage. Can we try again? Can we do a redo? There's often when we're getting us spat about something, and one of us will come to the other one and say, can we be friends again? Like, can we just like start over? Like, and it's sort of funny. And then you kind of let your guard down and be like, yeah, okay, like, let's just move on. Right.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we should move to lightning round, but I don't want to. So thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
So with that, lightning round.
All right, lightning round. Here we go. Who is your favorite saint?
I think it's a tie between Saint Therese, the Little Flower, and JP2. I love both of them from a very young age. I think the saints find you, and saints have found us. Therese came to me when I was 18 years old, and she has taught me how to be little independent. And I needed to learn that, as I said. And then John Paul II, I went to World Youth Day when he was there in Denver when I was a young person. And I was just so impacted by him. He lived a heroic life. And so I love him. Yeah.
Oh, and favorite devotion?
Probably the rosary. I mean, just classic. Like, there's so much power there that I think just, we don't even understand ourselves, but pretty much every saint loved the rosary. So I think that's a good place to go.
Hard to go wrong.
Very true.
Yeah, hard to go wrong. Yeah.
Awesome. Favorite book recommendation?
This is a little bit weird, but I would say the Catechism, actually. It's really beautiful. I studied it when I was in university, and I keep going back to it over and over again. There's so much that I will open it up and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is just so good, so true, and really beautiful. Now, for fun, I would say the Narnia Chronicles. I'm rereading them right now, and I love those books. There's such a good spiritual analogy for the Christian life, but there's also just that innocence and wonder there that I'm really enjoying again.
Oh, I love both of those. Love those. And where can people learn more about what you guys have going on?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, our podcast, Abiding Together, is mine with Sister Miriam James and our friend Michelle Bensinger. And then Jake has one with Dr. Bob Schutz on healing called Restore the Glory. He also has a course that he's developed right now that's online. It's an identity course, and it involves some of the stuff about story and understanding how to begin to heal some of those wounds, so that we're laying a good foundation as beloved sons and daughters of God, so that we begin to operate in relationships out of that place of stability. So this is part of our passion for helping young people mature. And this is a really, I mean, he's an excellent teacher, so I highly recommend it. So liferestoration.ca is our website. They can find information there. And then, of course, they can connect with us on Instagram, all the things, and our podcast. So
yeah. Awesome. Heather, thank you so much. For our listeners, we hope and pray that this time will be your link to living the faith like never before. Please leave us a comment. It is hard to make these videos and send them out on the internet and just hope that they're making a difference in someone's life. So if that's you, let us know. Let us know what stood out to you, and let us know, just how this has impacted you. Please check out all of Heather Khym's stuff. I mean, the things that they're putting out are amazing. And if you just want to dive deeper into any of the topics that we talked about, check all of that out. So again, Heather, just thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be with you.
And for all of our listeners, we are praying for you. Until next time, please pray for us. God bless.